Welcome, Mollie, to the Dr. Nurse podcast. I'm so happy to have you on today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I know we got to chat a little bit before we hit record, and I feel like we are kindred spirits and have a lot in common, a lot of alignments here that I'm really excited to discuss on this podcast.
This episode of the Dr. Nurse podcast, we are going to be focusing on sleep. And as I've been doing kind of a deep dive into health and wellness, it's this thing that just keeps coming up to the surface as super important. And so I wanted to have an educated conversation with a sleep expert about why sleep is so important to nurses. Where does sleep intersect with nurses? Because again, I was telling Mollie before the podcast, a lot of the nurses that we see in practice that are working and out there just stressed out to the max, burned out, obesity, fighting autoimmune diseases, and we also work night shift. And we also work shifts that, again, take away from our health and our wellness. And so I want to just bring conversation around that and to really bring awareness to how important sleep is for our careers. Mollie, I'll let you take it away, kind of describe a little bit about your story, and then kind of go through why sleep is so essential for your health, your mood, your waistline, why sleep is just paramount to having a life of wellness.
Absolutely. Well, number one, I think one of the things that we were vibing on is the fact that my family is littered with nurses, and my grandmother's a nurse, my multiple aunts are nurses, my cousin, just lots of alignment with nurses. I've seen what that looks like and those different types of shifts that they might be carrying and the struggles that can come about from that. I really, really empathize. And so I really want to stand as an opportunity to speak to this topic of sleep and how this can play so crucially into what nurses are needing to deal with and the struggle that's there. So I really am grateful to be here. And as far as the backstory, it is, I think, interesting and hopefully relevant because my story is one of struggle, really. And the creation of this company, Sleep is a Skill, had come from really aiming to solve my own problem with my sleep. So, and I share that because for whoever is listening and wherever they might be at with their relationship to their sleep, no matter what is kind of what they're struggling with, I really am a stand that there are so many things that we can do to make a difference. So stay tuned. We're going to dive into it. Even if you're just kind of sleep curious and want to look at just a little bit of up-leveling things that you could do, we'll speak to that. But also if you really are struggling, there's certainly a lot to dive into. But the why I got here, what it looked like for me, my relationship to my sleep was one of a lot of labels and narratives. So for most of my life, it was that I'm a short sleeper, I'm a night owl, it's in my genes, you'll sleep when you're dead, all of these sort of isms, or even just judgments on myself of, come on, just let's rally, let's mind over matter, lots of different ways of navigating this. As a child, as a teenager, in my early 20s, all of it looked a lot like that. And it looked like a fixed conversation is how I was relating to it. That's how it is for me. This is kind of my lot and nothing to really look at because it's just more about surviving that particular part of my life. And it wasn't until I went through my own period of insomnia while traveling internationally, and this came on the heels of being a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, really burning the candle at both ends, getting sick progressively more and more often, getting the beginnings of an ulcer, having shingles in my 20s, more and more anxiety, and really just not drawing the parallels of how my management or my lack of management of my sleep was playing a role there. And so I have a tendency of being kind of asleep at the wheel until, even with all these knocking signs from the body that something's not well, kind of continuing on and doing the things that don't work. And it wasn't until I went through that period of insomnia. And this was traveling internationally. My fiance and I had this idea of becoming kind of digital nomads, but far before our businesses were ready for that. And so the stress that we had in New York, we kind of just took on the road with even more variability that comes with travel and all the things. And what that ended up looking like was just night after night of not being able to sleep. And at first I thought this is jet lag. I've never really traveled much. I came from not a lot of money. So this was like a newer thing for me. And then it kept going and my amount of stress was mounting. And so I started having a lot of fear because I come from a family of individuals who had a lot of prescription medications, sleeping medications, all of that. So when this started happening for me, a lot of alarm bells went off of, oh no, is this the moment for me that I'm going to kind of go in this path? So I went to the doctors in Croatia with Google Translate and said, help, I can't sleep. And they just sort of looked at me and said, okay, well, here's a prescription. And it was their version of Ambien. And in that moment, it was really a kind of wake up call for me, no pun intended, that I needed to address this, needed to get at the root of this. And it really sent me down this rabbit hole of exploring, not even exploring, like really feverishly finding the solution is what I was looking for. And in the process of that, became really fascinated with so many elements that, particularly chronobiology, so the science of time and how this affects your biology. And it became a shakeup of how I'd been managing my life. So as I started to institute these things and meeting with tons of experts and just exploring all kinds of modalities, some working, some not working, slowly I began to bring back and restore my sleep. And this took time. But then once it restored to that baseline, which as I shared wasn't that great, then it became this conversation of optimization. And this was a whole new world for me. And as my life started to shift in alignment with this changes of my sleep and what came with that, in order to change this, because I was such an extreme night owl, I had to really turn upside down my habits and patterns, and really my life looked very different on the other side of that. So It totally changed things in such a phenomenal way that I could not stop talking about it. So organically, this sort of just grew into small groups and then one-on-ones and courses. And now we have almost 4 years of weekly sleep optimization newsletters. We have weekly sleep podcasts with some of the top sleep experts in the world. We're in hotels. We are in Casa Cipriani in Manhattan. We work with particularly poker players, which oddly kind of align with nursing, if you'll believe it or not. They have a lot of variability in their schedule and kind of akin to shift work, lots of stress, lots of variability. But I say all that truly because that some of these lowest moments of our life, and if it looks like for anyone listening around their sleep, that it can be such a blessing, and it can be the body really communicating that something is not working. And this is an opportunity to discover lots of different ways that we can transform the experience of our life and our sleep. So we're going to definitely get into that today.
Yeah, I love that. Through your deep diving, why is sleep so important, especially in regards to women, and how at different points in our life, how sleep affects us? We have some of the worst shifts we have to cover, 7 to 7, these super long shifts, and driving home after we've been exhausted, and then the blackout curtains to keep it all dark, and getting up and doing it night and night after night. And it was one of those things that my mom is Puerto Rican, and she was like, don't do the night shift. I'm like, Mom, there's more money. She's like, no. It's about your health. And so she said this to me, and I always listened to her because I knew there was wisdom in what she was saying. It's hard not to look at the paycheck and realize like, oh my God, the shift diff is so much nicer. But again, just why is it important that we get sleep? What does sleep do for the body? Because that's kind of where I want to start. And then I want to transition us into how we can biohack later down in the conversation.
Well, one, I'm glad you listened to your mom where possible. And I also want to be responsible for the fact that our society is run on and is dependent upon shift workers. And it's so, so crucial. So what do they do? And what do all of us that might have some of that variability in our schedule do? So one, I think it's really great to start with the why, because many of us might not be aware of just how much of an impact it can make on our health. And I'm really standing as making the argument that on kind of, if you imagine a pyramid of health, that I really firmly believe that sleep is the foundational rung of that pyramid. And for so long, it's been exercise, it's been nutrition, but I'm really stand that we speak to that sleep is the beginning because it impacts even our results with those other two areas. And then of course, all the other things that go into wellness and mindset and others. So just from that visual, what are some of the specifics that get impacted? Well, we struggle to find a single area of life that is not negatively impacted when our sleep is deficient. So what I mean by that categorically is Harvard Medicine had reported a while back that people who regularly get fewer than 6 hours of sleep a night are at a higher risk for a number of things. Diabetes, they're at a higher risk for heart disease, stroke, cognitive decline, and my favorite, death from any cause, which basically is all-cause mortality. So those are just a couple buckets that show up. And beyond that, as we get more layered and get more nuanced, certain elements as far as hormonal imbalances, just at the bare minimum, cortisol is one that can really get augmented as we are having some of this disruption in our sleep. And certainly melatonin levels can go all out of whack and occurring at the wrong times, which is a master antioxidant, super important for our health and well-being beyond just what we think of for sleep. But then also for our waistlines, as you were speaking to as well, we see changes because glucose exists on a circadian rhythm, which is fascinating. And I shared how fascinated I was in this topic of chronobiology, the science of time, and how time affects our biology. And it's clear that circadian medicine is purported to be this upcoming trend and already a trend in the medicine space, but also what could be coming in the future and how this could have wild implications in many areas of how we're thinking about health. There are many clocks in our body, and virtually every cell and organ in our body is kind of, you can think of it as equipped with these clocks, and they're looking to stay on time as regulated by our master clock in our brain, our suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is kind of the conductor of all these clocks. And when we start having all of that variability in our schedule, and we choose, or we do have those variabilities in our night shifts or rotating shifts, or all of these things that can come up that can throw off those clocks, a lot of things seem to be impacted. And one is glucose and leptin. And so that kind of, or leptin and ghrelin, and how that affects glucose and insulin. So when we think about those things, then, well, one immediate impact, and I have a lot of clients because we're really based on technology, accountability, and behavioral change, and how that affects your sleep and how we can help make a difference with your sleep from that vantage point. But because we're so technologically focused, we have a lot of people wearing different wearables, and one of them is continuous glucose monitors, and they're fascinated. Okay, fantastic, right? So fascinating. I'm sure you can speak to that. When anyone not watching this, Sandra's got hers on, so, and I've got mine on. So you can start to really discover a lot of things for yourself. And one of the things that many people discover is how even just one or two or more nights of poor sleep, how you might be setting yourself up for more of that roller coaster of a day. And yes. And how much of a bi-directional relationship is there? Because then if you are choosing those kind of poor foods or available foods, and maybe sometimes on our night shifts or what have you, we might not have lots of options, and we're choosing some of these foods that then are further amplifying that roller coaster, and then that roller coaster affects our ability to get great sleep. So there's a lot there. And that's not even speaking to some of the emotional implications. So emotional regulation, kind of depression, anxiety, a number of things can also come up when we are getting insufficient sleep. So those are just a few.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I love how you just bundled it up so you can really make it clear that this is something that, again, affects every area of your life. It is the pyramid. It is the base of the pyramid because everything else builds on top of it. It ends up driving how you behave. It ends up driving how you're able to handle a difficult situation with a patient. It drives how you end up eating the next day and what you end up craving and how you end up getting into these cycles of then eating foods that aren't good for you. And so it ends up driving almost every area of your life. And then depending on where you are in your age group and kind of if you're an older female or a younger female, where you are in your cycle also affects your ability to heal and to be ready for the next thing that's coming, and infertility and all these different things that I've seen nurses struggling with, that it's like, whoa, these things are all based on this one area, and how well are we doing here? And that's really what, again, I want to bring focus in on, because here, like, what I talk about all the time is about your career, but if your career is built on top of this element of sleep, right? And how successful you are at your job and doing the things that give you passion and light you up inside. Again, if you're getting good sleep and you're really making sure you're focusing in on yourself, then you can go out and do the things that you love and be present and be aware. And it just trickles into everything. And that's pretty much what you're saying. It trickles down all the way down to how your hormones react, and you don't even know these are things that are happening inside of you. One of the things you also say is there are things that we can do, and I know you've linked sleep to a number of neurodegenerative diseases. It's linked to other cancers, diabetes. I mean, this is just, it's leaking into everything. And so for my nurses that do work shift work, for my nurse practitioner students that are like, listen, I don't sleep. I can't sleep. I have a kid. I'm trying to get my master's degree to become a nurse practitioner. Like, what do I do? What can I do to help kind of bridge some of those areas that I know I'm deficient in, and kind of what I like to call biohacking, and do your best to kind of understand, like, okay, I love one of the quotes that you said about what you don't measure, you can't. You said what you don't measure, you can't manage. That's what you said. Yes. And I love that because, I mean, again, that's where I wear the glucose monitor. I really want an Oura ring just to like get that data, like see what I'm building. What am I doing here? Because you can't see it. But for my nurse, it's like, listen, I don't have time to manage it. I don't have time to measure it. Tell me what I could be doing. I just want maybe some simple hacks. And then also kind of where your business comes into play. Like if somebody wanted to reach out to you, I saw that you had an assessment on there. It was super informational with just things that you can do just right now, immediate, that don't even cost a lot of money to help you get to sleep better.
First, while it's top of mind, I just want to make 2 quick book recommendations if anyone's listening. So if they want to go deeper, because clearly we call this company Sleep is a Skill for a reason, because we're really a stand that this could be this is an entire area of study. It's something we do a third of our life, and there is just so much to explore. So my hope is that even if we're sparking an interest in this, that you might want to go deeper. So 2 that I think might apply in this conversation. One is the book Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. And most people, if you're even remotely interested in sleep, you may have already read this, but I do mention that just because of his focus on the medical field as well, and really sounding the alarms of the importance of kind of changing how that is conducted, especially during residency and other areas of time when the medical field might have some problems of the relation of sleep management and how that looks currently.
Those effects also get compounded, right? Because it's not just you miss one night of sleep. It's like, no, you're missing multiple nights of multiple amount, like small amounts. And so he talks about the compounding effect of that, especially for physicians. And here they are operating on people sleep deprived. It's like, what are we doing?
Alarming.
This is so scary. Yeah.
Alarming. And drawing parallels between other countries and how they're managing their medical fields and haven't necessarily and don't look at sleep in the same way as kind of expendable as how we certainly seem to be managing it right now. So it's an interesting book that very eye-opening and been a bestseller for a long time for a reason. So that one could be a thing to explore. And then the other one I recommend is a little newer, and it's called The Sleep Fix. And that one, I mentioned that because that's specifically meant to also help support shift workers, which there aren't a lot of books out there just directed at shift workers. So I think that could be helpful. So, and what's interesting about that one is it's written by a ABC correspondent who was on the night shift. And so she had her own experience and really kind of from a journalist lens went down the rabbit hole on this topic. So hopefully those can provide more tips. So for the time we have today, then what I can share are a couple things. One, I want to this might seem like, how is this related? But I think it helps kind of provide a kind of container of what we're speaking to and part of the problem that we're in for many of us with our sleep. And this applies to nurses and doctors, et cetera. So one study that I often point to occurred in 2001, and it's the EPA. EPA did a study, and they found that the average American is spending 93% of their life indoors, and it splits down to 87% of their life inside buildings, another 6% in automobiles. And I'm saying that because that's basically leaving us that the average person is spending only about 7% of their entire life spent outside. So why the heck am I talking about this with sleep? Because you said, okay, let's do some quick tips. Well, I think it is super important for us to get grounded in one of the problems of why are we having such an astronomical struggle for many of us with our sleep. And it just, by the recent decades, has just absolutely escalated to a real tipping point of a problematic situation that we have here. And part of the theory around this is that our circadian rhythm, this rhythm that is basically occurring on a 24-hour rhythm, is guided by the behaviors that we engage in and our environment that we're exposing our bodies to. And so if we are now living as kind of indoor zoo animals, and certainly any nurse can attest that like, oh my God, I can't see these walls anymore. I've been inside this place for too long.
Yes.
the problems that really amount from this are that the divorcing from these rhythms of nature, the basic elements of sunrise, sunset, but also the temperature changes that happen when we're outside, the kind of air quality, a number of things that come about. These inform these rhythms of what to be doing when, and all those clocks that I mentioned before.
Yes.
So what this really is a stand for is that in order to help heal some of these problems with our clocks, our inner clocks, it really requires an element of rewilding, or how to basically create these rhythms of nature, even if we are living far outside of that, like many of shift workers are. So what would that look like? So one, we want to actually create a blueprint based around what we would see in nature, but even if we're living inside our own smart homes and all the things that we've got going on, how can we mimic that? So that's what we're going to aim to do for today. And so if we are someone that might have variability in our shifts, or long shifts, or rotating shifts, or all those things, a couple of things that we want to do. We want to create as much of a lifestyle as possible with our shifts that we humanly can, because sleep loves consistency. And with that example that I shared, what's one of the most consistent things that happens if you truly are living in nature like our ancestors did for thousands and thousands of years? You would be rising with the sun to an element. You'd be sleeping outside and on the ground, pretty much close to the ground, which is cool and as cold as it can be in the environment. And then as the sun is rising, then what also happens, the presence of light is there, and then the temperature goes up. So those two cues actually help to serve as this anchoring system to wake us up. So we want to mimic this in whatever schedule you got going on, but the goal is 7 days a week that you're creating this. So we have our clients create something called our Circadian Crafted Day. So we educate around all these things that affect your circadian rhythm and your infradian rhythm, which is what you mentioned, pointed to for women and their cycles. So that's our rhythms that happen about a month. And for us, we need to also consider that because that impacts our sleep too.
Yes.
But so with our Circadian Crafted Day, we are seeing how can we consistently have this consistent wake up time. So that's one thing that, please, if you're listening, that you want to really see how can you create this in your own life, that you have your consistent wake up time no matter what really happens with the night before, for creating this mindfully. And so you're finding how can you create a consistent wake up time, ideally 7 days a week with plus or minus 30 minutes or so. And so that becomes like your anchor by which you then can bring all these other hacks or what have you into. So now if you've got your consistent wake up time, and so for some people that can be a struggle, because if you are on the night shift, that may mean that that becomes your reality going forward for the time that you are a shift worker. But that's really that is our recommendation for night shift workers, is how can that become just, that's what life looks like for you, and how can we embrace that and make that something where you really look forward to that, and you get sleepy at the same time, you wake up at the same time. Rotating shift work is a whole other animal. So that is something that gets a little more nuanced. That is one of the reasons why I recommend that book as well, to go a little bit deeper, because that takes a lot more kind of strategy or what have you. But assuming that right now we're just speaking about generalized shift work or for nurses in general, then you're creating that consistent wake up time. And what I want you to make sure you're doing is in the morning after you wake up, that you are getting yourself exposed to light as quickly as possible. Our goal is for it to be natural light, because that has a number of signals that are present in it, because it's full spectrum light. But this is not like a woo-woo thing. This is biologically hardwired, and it's known as sunlight anchoring. I believe that was coined by Dan Party out of Stanford. And speaking to the sunlight anchoring is where you want to get that brightest shot of light in the first half of your day, because that sets that master clock that we spoke to, and then really has a cause and effect of when you're going to get tired later on in the evening. So if you strategically, if you want to stay up later, with some of my poker players do want that because they have to be alert for a tournament or whatever, we can delay the time that they get their bright sunlight on purpose, and that's going to make them sleepy later. So know that you have a real cause and effect of what happens and when you're exposed to this. But if you are a shift worker, you might be missing that time of the sunrise period or the earlier part of the sun. So you might need to artificially create this for yourself. So you can certainly get different light boxes. And so you might already be aware of some of this, but I hope that we bring in a bit more of a sense of urgency that this is something that you do every single morning. You're exposed to that for an extended period of time, and knowing that if you aren't getting as much sunlight exposure, this can affect your vitamin D production, and vitamin D is a precursor to serotonin, which is a precursor to melatonin. So you absolutely need to attend to that. There's one light box, no affiliation, on the market that is FDA cleared to generate vitamin D from a box, which is Sperti lamp. Sperti, I believe. And some of it can be covered by insurance if you have like skin issues that are coming out as a result of kind of problems there, as far as one of them being vitamin D. So some people can get this covered, but you really want to holistically look at how can I create and mimic what would be happening in nature for me while I'm inside and probably spending a lot of time in the hospital. So if we are in the hospital, that's another element that I want to put in, is that how can you get outside as much as humanly possible? For years past, there might have been smokers that would get their smoke breaks. We want to get our sun breaks. I know this sounds crazy, but getting outside and getting that sunlight exposure, because that is really going to help you stay on time. And of course, you do want to apply this at a schedule that makes sense for your shift. So if this would be out of alignment with when we want to get you the brightest shot of light, then proceed accordingly. But for most of us, we want to be getting outside as much as we can to get that naturally occurring sunlight. And then one of the other resources that I would just drop is Time Shifter. It's an app that originally was created for jet lag. And so for management of jet lag, so you would put in like your flight. So if you're ever traveling, going to hop a bunch of time zones, you would put in your flight, and then it would guide you on when you need to be sleeping, when you need light exposure, when, if you use caffeine or melatonin, when you dose those, right? But what I'm really excited about that company is that now they're releasing this same kind of protocol for shift workers, and it's beautifully designed. So I'm really, really excited about that. And they're actually pulling the same algorithm that NASA uses for their astronauts to stay on time while they're shuttling through space, because sun is rising and setting every 90 minutes or so when they're in space. So it's really crucial for them to stay aligned. So they don't mess around with that piece. So they're pulling that for us to utilize on a day-to-day basis. So some of those resources should be helpful, but I know out of what I just mentioned, it's the consistent wake up time and really designing that to be a lifestyle for whatever your schedule is. Then you are applying that bright shot of light on the first, married as quickly as possible to when you first wake up. And then on the flip side of light, and these are all known as Zeitgebers out of chronobiology. So that means time givers. And so these time givers are things in our environment or behavior that basically set or entrain that master clock and that circadian rhythm. So what are those things? The top high impactor time giver circadian rhythm entrainment element is light. So that's why we mentioned that one first, but you can't have light without darkness. So on the flip side of that, you want to figure out in your day where you're going to be getting, where darkness makes sense to kind of go dim to dark. So where would sunset be occurring? Even if you're a shift worker, then kind of mimicking that in whatever way possible. And then you can move over to blue blockers. Don't do clear though in the evening time. You want them to be orange or red, because those clear ones are insufficient for the night anyway. And so make sure you're getting those. You're mimicking the sunset. If you can get red light in your environment, amber lighting, all of those things, that can make a huge difference in your melatonin production, because that will be one of the last things I'll say on this point, is that melatonin is known as the hormone of darkness. It's also been called the vampire hormone, and it's called all of that because in order to sufficiently create melatonin, the body requires the presence of darkness. So if we are not properly really bathing ourselves in darkness at night, then we're not boosting and building enough of that internal melatonin. And that's a big, big problem also for immune function, health and well-being, because melatonin is that master antioxidant. We've seen it have efficacy as far as cancer studies and its importance there, and other areas. COVID, it got a lot of press. So whatever you can do to make sure that you have that balance of light, dark. And then my last quick thing, I know I've been talking a long time, temperature is the other piece.
I was going to say, chill.
Yeah. temperature chill. So, and getting it, because our temperature is not static as throughout the course of the day, it oscillates and it moves. So we want to help cultivate a higher temperature throughout the course of the day. And then a real pretty dramatic drop as far as temperature is concerned, because the body does so much to keep us on a similar temperature. And then it does drop in the evening, and that drop helps signal that it's time for bed. And if we're not having that proper drop, then that can be problematic. Lots of things can affect temperature. Glucose, so if you're eating too late, that can kind of uptick the bodily temperature, and that can make it harder to fall asleep and certainly stay asleep. Those wake ups happen. Size timing and thought timing even. So if you're having stressful thoughts at the wrong times, that can actually, there are certain studies showing that can heat up the prefrontal cortex when your brain is sort of on overdrive and kind of this hyper aroused brain activity state. So giving you some reverence for what types of thoughts you're engaging in. Does it make sense to go on social media or whatever at the times when you might not want to be cultivating that? And so some of those things are elements that can be impacting that bodily temperature. And then I guess I would say the last one that really can also do that is known as chronopharmacology, or drug timing. And when we say drug timing, that can mean our most basic drugs like our caffeine, our alcohol, our THC, but then also prescription drugs or supplements, things that we might be having that could be sending the wrong signals at the wrong times.
Yeah. I feel like what you just said in all of that was that this is an art and a science to understanding really where it is that you need personally to adjust your life, and that having someone that really understands in an incredible level of depth. It's really impressive, Mollie, how you understand sleep and what it does to the body. And you gave resources, because again, I read the book Why We Sleep, and it just completely changed my whole thought process, because I was kind of like what you were saying before, like I'll sleep when I die. And then I realized that that's exactly what I am going to do. I'm going to die if I don't sleep. And so when I became a new mom and I wasn't sleeping and I was working full time and I was getting up at 6 a.m. and not getting to bed until 11, 12 o'clock and just repeating this cycle again, I looked at my husband and I said, something needs to change. I can't do my career and be a mom and get adequate sleep. I'm going to die. Like, this is going to kill me. And eventually something is going to break. And so that's why I stepped away. I said, I can only do this part-time. I can't work full-time. This is too much. I need rest and I need sleep, and you've got to prioritize that in your life. And I love everything that you just said, the quick biohacks that we can do to, again, get those clocks back on to the right time, or at least a time that can work with your lifestyle and what you're doing, and getting out in nature and grounding and kind of resetting the energy and the because we're energy. Like when you think about like what happens when you're coding, what do they say? Like, well, 20 joules or 30 joules, or they spit out like an energy molecule, right? And then you don't think that it matters that you connect to the sun and the earth, and we were sleeping on the ground as cave people. And so you just start to realize we've so far removed ourselves from those things out of a matter of convenience, right? So we do live in our smart homes and we do have all these nice things. But what we've done is we've actually, I think, through moving to a level of convenience, we're moving away from what's naturally something that we should be doing. I'm not saying you got to sleep outside like a weirdo in your neighborhood, but
totally
those little things that you can do to mimic that and to realign your body with the earth and with what you needing. Mollie, where can they find you? Like, what do you do as far as consulting, group visits? What is it that maybe you could offer a nurse that's like, I want to figure this out?
Absolutely. So one, you can find us at sleepisaskill.com, and it really acts as kind of a bucket for a lot of different steps that you can take depending on where you're at in your sleep. So one, if you want to just kind of learn more, you're kind of sleep curious, then you can take our sleep assessment, get some resources back based on what you're dealing with your sleep that's tailored to you. And then that also can sign you up for our weekly newsletter, which I shared. We're almost at 4 years of doing that every Monday. And we really recommend people respond back to that. And because we really try to put in some of the information from people that are reading that and sharing any stats that they have or experiments that they're doing or whatever, feel free to respond back to that. That's every Monday. And then we also have the weekly podcast, the Sleep is a Skill podcast, which we're so grateful. We just hit number 2 for sleep podcasts. Granted, there's not a lot of sleep podcasts, but we feel really excited because it's just a part of our real dying mission to make sure that we're getting out this conversation around sleep and really transforming this conversation on the planet. So to have that is really a real honor. So we want to help support getting out quality information on sleep to the masses. So if you want to just learn more, those are steps you can take. And if you are then really struggling, I love what you said. If someone's like, oh my God, these are so many things, where do I even begin? One of the things that we require everyone we work with is to wear an Oura ring. And I have no affiliation with Oura. I mean, I like them and they're great.
Yeah.
But I don't get anything from people signing up or getting Oura ring. But we do have everyone wearing that as of right now. And that could change. There's so many exciting sleep wearables on the market. But we do have people wearing that. So that could be a place that you could start. And then what we do is we have a couple offerings. So with people, with your Oura ring, you can share your data to our dashboard so we can go over all of this information, this breadth of information as far as for however long you've been tracking, or even if you've only been tracking for a few days, we can still get some information out of that. So we have a couple different things. We have something called the Sleep 360, which is a 90-minute call that we do have you do a lot of work before even getting on that call. So you do our first 2 weeks of our online course that has a lot of assessments. You also send over your sleep environment pictures. You do a different, something called the sleep. Yeah, so they call the sleep sabotagers we have you do, which is looking at all these areas of life and how some of those stressful pieces and any stress load might be impacting some of your sleep results. And then also looking at physiology and how, from a physiological standpoint, are there certain things at play that we might want to hone in on? So we take lots of assessments. You also create your Circadian Crafted day. And you do this all before you get on our call. So then we can go over all this along with your sleep stats on the call. So we really aim for that to be super valuable. And that's one offering that's kind of the lowest interactivity. Then the next one is a 10-week sleep program, which is something that we really are excited about because we continue to improve upon that and having different groups. So basically it's a group experience where everyone is wearing the Oura ring, and then you're going through 10-week modules and you're really transforming your life and your sleep as a result. And each call you get on each week is this live call. You're answering. We're going over questions and looking at your specific sleep stats. So we're sharing screen and looking at your stats live. So that's been really exciting. We have office hours with that and all kinds of things. And then for one-on-ones, if people are really struggling, they've got more layered things at play, then that's the one-on-one option. And that's a 90-day kind of experience. And then sometimes we go longer if there's more that we want to really work on. So those are some of the steps that you could take. But all of those, like I said, for the actual ones where we go deeper with you, they do involve that Oura ring. So that could be something that you could even start with now and then kind of set up something that makes sense for you.
That is so cool. And again, I saw that you had the Oura ring on. I was like, oh, I'm so jelly. I love that thing so much. And seeing that people they get such great data from it, I do get a little overwhelmed because it does seem like a lot. Like when I see my dad has one, and I was like, oh, let me see what the data is. So I was looking at his app and I was like, there's a lot of stuff on here. It would be nice to have someone kind of walk you through, like, this is significant because like, this is what this means. And I definitely think that's something I would be like willing to check out. Thanks for coming on, Mollie. Thanks for sharing everything with my nursing listening audience. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing and creating a forum for, certainly for me to be able to talk about my favorite topic, but certainly for all of these things that you're doing for people in the area of health and wellness, and then sharing vulnerably your experience. It's just so important to have those people to point to that went through that tough time and then came out on the other side of it. I know when I was struggling with my sleep, I wanted success stories. I wanted to see, okay, is this my lot in life forever? You can get that catastrophic thinking when you're not sleeping well. And certainly to be able to point to people that have made a difference there in whatever you're struggling with is so, so huge. So you're making such a difference. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me. And yeah, just really appreciate it.